story. When the pandemic took hold last year, we experienced a simultaneous blow to both our freedom and our sense of agency. Not only were our activities restricted by external forces, it became difficult to know what we could or couldn't do inside those restrictions. I'm sure I'm not the only one who left his mail outside for 24 hours. Hindsight has found this unnecessary, but who knew at the time? Over time, some things improved. We practiced our agency within the boundaries of our freedom, and life became something understandable, negotiable. The narrative might not have been great, but at least we could follow it. Now the vaccine brings a twist, where those who were previously being careful suddenly have new choices. From a narrative perspective, this is exciting stuff. The arrival of something that alters the balance of agency and freedom in a character's life creates great potential for action and drama. Think of the last compelling story you encountered, and I'll bet you find something like this at work. If you're worried that you're not feeling as overjoyed and liberated as you think you should, go easy on yourself. You're in the midst of a big plot turn, and that isn't easy, no matter how the story turns out. Okay. Thank you. I'm turning it back over to Mike.
I just wanted to let everybody know who the people are that are regular attendees and board members from the CAUUC organization, and these are the people that have been involved in the organizing and planning before we selected the panelists, and then of course brought them into the fray and welcome them here as well today. So joined by Marie Cobbs, if your audio is working. I don't know if it is. It wasn't so well a moment ago, but you could say hi. If you're not able to, we'll catch you later. Darren Howard is here as well. There's Marie, I see her.
Hi.
Good morning. Darren Howard from Unitarian Church of Hinsdale.
Morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
And Michelle, who you just heard from a moment ago.
Hi.
and not with us because they're at another meeting right now, Irene Raven and Janet Burns. Emmylou Belcher, I don't think has joined us this morning, even though she had said she planned to. And Kate Moody has been a regular in our group as well.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Glad that you're here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. There's over 55 people registered for our event this morning, coming from 13 different congregations that are in the greater Chicago area and collar counties of Indiana. And so welcome to all of you. And if you are not from one of those congregations and you're joining from someplace else, we welcome you as well. Thanks for coming today. And please do make sure to introduce yourself. The agenda that we have for this morning, we're just gonna talk about for a moment, and that is that we'll enter into our moderated panel discussion after introducing our panelists. And then we'll have a brief break, sorry, not a brief break, but we'll have an open Q&A after the moderated Q&A, and then we'll have a brief break, which will be then followed by breakout groups. And based on the selections that people made, there's 5 different breakout groups that will occur today. And those breakout groups have already been set up. When I say already been set up, there's names of breakout groups, and you will have to navigate using your Zoom panel to get to the breakout room that you would like to go to. But those rooms have been created already. And we'll talk a little bit about the breakouts right at the time we're about to have them, so we can speak to what we're going to try to accomplish during that breakout session. And following the breakouts, we'll have a report back of findings or highlights from the discussion, and then that will be the end of the conference. The annual meeting of CAUUC will occur 10 minutes after that. We'll start for people who are able to join us and participate in the election of our directors and our voting on our budget and any other business and discussion that we'll look to have. So we invite everybody who would be interested to stay for the annual meeting as well, though obviously not required. These are the affinity groups based on people's selections, what their preferences were. We were able to accommodate almost everybody's first choice as having an affinity group. There were two that did not have adequate numbers to be able to support having an affinity group, unfortunately. And one of them was young adults, which is a challenging one sometimes. And the other one was the stewardship focused one. There was one person who had chosen that as first. Because of the nature of social media and technical team having some overlap, we decided to combine those so that anybody that's interested in either of those topics, please join that particular affinity group later. Now, if you're not familiar at all with what these affinity groups are, this is a concept that we had created to try to foster communication, relationship building, and collaboration between the people that are participants in not just these conferences, but across congregations. And when we would have in-person meetings as a CAUUC group, our spring or fall conferences that we're now doing Zoom were in person, like you can see in this image that's shown on the slide. We would meet in person, we meet via video, and we also have Google groups set up that communications between people that have common interests in areas like the different affinity group titles. We invite people to have communication with each other so we can foster collaboration and not reinvent the wheel. That's really the underlying principle. So with that, we'll turn to a brief introduction for each of our panelists. We have Reverend Hilary Krivchenia from Countryside Church, who's our senior minister. She's my minister. We have Reverend Eileen Wiviott, who's the senior minister at the Unitarian Church of Evanston. We have Adam Gough, who's also at UCE, and he is the Congregational Life Assistant and Audio-Visual Technician, which is one of the key reasons he's here today. And we have Tom Dempsey, who's the president-elect at Countryside Church and also the lead for the task force involved with church reopening. And last but not least, Shelby Daniel-Wayman, who happens to have grown up in the church of the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale and is an epidemiologist. Welcome, panelists. So let's end that. And does I'll have to go and reset up all of the spotlights, apparently. I'm sorry. Is that Adam doing that?
I'll never tell.
I was thinking maybe Adam could help.
You can.
Who am I missing? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Tom Dempsey.
Okay, I'll find you, Tom. Don't worry. There you are. Oh, shoot.
Mike and I decided Adam's going to form a business of consulting on this stuff.
I might.
That's a good thing. All right, so
He can't. He just needs to start charging for it.
Yeah.
But I guess I would ask that for this session, this part of our discussion, if you're not a panelist, if you wouldn't mind muting so that any background noise wouldn't be disrupting to everybody. And also, we are recording our session here just so that everybody is aware. The format and structure of the questions, thought it might be best to kind of think about it along a timeline as we talk about reopening church and reimagining church. Thought it might be helpful to start with winding back the hands of time and going back to the beginning of the pandemic when we all of a sudden had a reason to have some significant changes in our congregations to be able to keep these communities alive and connected. And so we'll start with some questions that are going back in time to that beginning of the pandemic, and then we'll come around to more current kind of matters, and then follow up with the future. So if I could start with a question and ask, what were the factors that impacted how easily or how difficult responding to the pandemic was for your congregation this past March? And if somebody wants to jump in first to answer that, feel free. I'm not going to call on a particular person.
Well, I don't mind.
Go for it.
Beginning, this is Hilary. I think there were a number of factors that combined. One was familiarity with technology already. So the congregation was already used to using Zoom up to a point. And also finances, what it would take to go from the Zoom platform to a more public platform, which I know we'll hear more about from Evanston. But other factors that influenced us had to do with a desire to continue a sense of intimacy, particularly when people felt so distant from one another physically. So that while we thought about pre-recording many things, which I know a number of congregations have done, in conversations with the worship team and other lay leadership, we realized that we liked the intimacy of live worship through Zoom because it did feel more like we were actually together. So the sense of warmth was another one of the factors. But also choosing to stay with Zoom and not streaming out into the public had to do with the financial factor of not being able to afford all of the level of licensing and permissions for the use of music put out on the interwebs. So those were some of the initial factors. I think the thing that made it easiest to make the transition was a tremendous desire, and I bet this is true for all of our congregations, to stay connected. It made it, no matter what the challenge was, it was a joyful process and an easy process to make that transition because of the hunger to stay connected.
Reverend Eileen, did you have things to add on that?
Yeah, that moment in time when we had to make that decision was one of those 24-hour periods that felt like a year. We in the Evanston congregation had the unfortunate reality check early on in the crisis that on March 10th, we found out that one of our congregants had been diagnosed, was showing symptoms at that point in the morning of COVID and was in the hospital. And by the end of the day had determined that he had tested positive and had been in a meeting with other folks earlier that week. So that whole day was about, at that point, the CDC and the Illinois Department of Health was not saying you need to close your doors. That was not the advice. And I was on the phone all day with experts trying to figure out what do we do. And it was only because of my staff, namely Karen Mooney, who had started that day as our congregational life director, who, was helped me sort of decide and sitting with the staff and trying to decide. And all we could do at that moment was to say, okay, let's close down for the week and we'll know more in a week. Of course, we knew more like in 2 days. We knew that this was not going anywhere, but it was so hard to wrap our heads around like a long-term situation. What was amazing was that Adam, who we know we are incredibly fortunate to have, within a few hours went away and had redesigned our website and figured out the best way for us to do an online service. And it's pretty much the same way that we've been doing it for 13 months. So yeah, it was, I mean, I can only say that the ability to make the decision that we made so swiftly was in some ways terrible fortune, and in some ways really good fortune of having a tremendous staff and a congregation that was incredibly appreciative, because we were in crisis as a community. Our beloved was ill and died 10 days later. Was one of the first cases in Illinois of somebody to die from COVID. And it just was not it just wasn't ever a question. It was just never a question that it was the right thing to do. And it was just a matter of how do we do it? How do we stay connected, and how do we form these different ways of being together? And we can get into more of that later.
That's a somber moment.
Yeah.
Maybe let me turn to Shelby for a moment. As an epidemiologist, what was your biggest lesson learned related to the response of the pandemic this year?
Yeah, so I think something that's already been touched on is the degree to which you kind of have to make decisions based on what you know now, and then acknowledging and being very public about the fact that you don't know everything yet. So there has never been a point in this pandemic where the advice has been settled, where we know what's going on and we know exactly what we're going to be recommending in 4 months. And so I think we've just continually had to learn to be better at being like, this is what we know, this is what we think we're going to know soon, and here's how we might have to change, but here's where we are now. We're gonna make these recommendations as firmly as we can for now. And the other side of that is actually something that my mentor in my first epidemiology position would tell me over and over again, and I don't think I ever fully appreciated until this pandemic, which is just the idea that you never know what you don't know until you look. So she would always say this. We would be like reading an article and they'd say like, oh, this vector or this disease doesn't exist in this place. And she'd be like, did they look? Do they know? And I think that has been a lesson I've kept coming back to in this pandemic of, do we know that something isn't here, or have we not looked yet? Do we know what the best thing to do is here, or is there still more that we need to learn there, and do we need to keep looking? And so I think that's also, that's often more on the science side, but I think it also is on the community side of like, we're all going to have to be making a lot of decisions for our churches soon, and what do you know, and what are you just assuming? If you're thinking about the vaccination level of your church, even, do you know what it is, or have you asked? Can you ask? Can you send out a survey and be like, hey, this is entirely anonymous, but have you gotten your second shot? And then make that decision based on something you actually know, rather than something you think you know, but you haven't checked. So that's something I'm constantly looking at when I think I know something. Have I actually looked? Do I actually know, or do I just think I know from something else?
I'm wondering, thinking about all the different organizations at the federal level, state level, local level that come forward, with recommendations. How is it that, members of congregations, people who are trying to keep each other safe, how do we navigate that? Who should we trust and follow? What's the hierarchy, if there is one? Who's the authority?
Yeah, so this is tricky, and this is something that's tricky that we navigate from within the system as well all of the time, of trying to make sure we're on the same page as you know, I'm at the state level, not speaking for the state, I'm speaking for myself, but we're constantly interfacing both with the CDC and with the locals. And it's less about who do you trust, and it's more about who do you go to for what. You know, it's a very interfacing system, and we're always trying to make sure that, you know, if we're speaking at the state level, we're echoing what the CDC is saying, and we're listening to our locals, and we're making sure we're incorporating what they're saying and what they're seeing on the ground. But we all have different specialties and the ability to kind of put different kinds of advice and different kinds of information out there. So it's a matter of figuring out who has the information that you need for whatever decision you're making. So how do you think about that? So the local is going to be the local health department, whether that's your county or your city, if you're in Chicago or Evanston. They're going to be the people who know what's going on the ground, and they're going to be the people that you're going to want to talk to if you have a specific situation. So if unfortunately you do have a situation where somebody in your congregation tests positive, or you think there's an exposure, like that's when you go immediately to the local. And they may also be telling you things that are more specific to your city. So because Chicago is a big city, sometimes things have to happen differently in Chicago. And so if your local is saying, yeah, we know the state's in a different place, but in Chicago we need to be doing X, then you got to listen to your local, because they know what's going on around you. But the state is generally where you can go for very specific rules and regulations. So I think a really good example to think about here is I've worked with daycare a lot in my position, and so I know that situation best. And so the state would be, or the local would be where you go if you have an exposure in your daycare. The state's going to be where you're going to go if you want very specific rules about what you should be doing in your daycare. It's going to give you stuff like how many people, you know, how many children should be with one adult in this current time when we're trying to keep groups small. How many, like, what are the specific symptoms that you should exclude a kid for? These very specific things that you can do to keep people safe. But the CDC, if you go all the way up to them, they have daycare guidance as well. And that daycare guidance is often going to be less specific, but a lot broader. So they might have something, you know, if you want to know, we have a kid with special needs, and we want to know what's the best thing we can do to keep them safe, and how can we help them, you know, follow all of these new rules that maybe are different and harder for them. The CDC has a whole section on that. You know, they have a whole section on ventilation and how to make your rooms more safe from an airborne standpoint. That, you know, at the state level, we didn't necessarily have time to put that in our guidance. So if you have a question that, you know, the state guidance just doesn't cover, going up to the CDC and saying, hey, do they have any advice for me? Do they have anything I can do? They often have much broader guidance that can cover more things, because they just have more experts and they have more people to give input on those things. And so, yeah, so it really depends on the question you're asking, which place has the best guidance.
Great, thank you. It's complicated, and I think the question, the question is appropriate for everybody. The answer to that question is complicated in many ways, and everybody who's trying to navigate their way in life, not just life in a congregation, but in life, is asking these kind of questions. And there's disagreements in, you know, in families even as to what constitutes safe practice. And so as we are looking at reopening congregations, this question is going to be, I think, asked by a lot of people. And the answer hopefully will be easier to get to, what the right thing to do is, because right now it doesn't seem that easy to get to. Let me ask another question and try to bring Tom and Adam also into the conversation here. Maybe speaking to how did, actually, let me ask the next question. Looking back over the past year, what were the most important lessons that were learned?
Well, I would just say, picking up on the last question, who do you trust? I think for our task force, there's been a general comfort that Illinois is responding in good faith and basically developing good protocols and good metrics. So rather than trying to reinvent metrics that we've seen in other churches, other organizations, some of which were hyper local, like looking at the number of cases in a specific county, we made a decision that generally, I think there was a comfort level with how Illinois and Cook County were responding. By virtue of where Palatine is, we're in Cook County, but we're only about 2 miles from Lake County. We're only about 4 miles from McHenry, et cetera. So you really have to kind of realize that your congregation is a region and look at that. And, you know, generally our discussion has been, we're going to follow Illinois guidelines when we get to the bridging phase and the reopening phase, but we're probably going to be just a little more conservative than that. You know, if there's a bridging phase, we might not jump on it on May 14th. We might wait a couple of weeks, err on the side of caution. So, and I'm sorry, that was the last question. What was the one that
No, that's
that you really wanted me to answer?
no. Thank you for that interjection. That was great.
And it's certainly different than, you know, I had the experience. I mean, the compliance in Illinois has been pretty good with mask wearing, quarantine protocols, et cetera. I had the experience of being in Wisconsin in the middle of the summer, and it was really culture shock how different that was. I also had the experience of being in Florida a couple of months ago and had the experience of how hyper local that was, that in some areas that were more populated, the protocols were good, but then when you get in other areas, they were non-existent. So I think actually those of us in Illinois have been fairly well served by our public health systems.
No doubt. Let's go to the next question, which was around what were the lessons learned, you know, the most important lessons learned over the past year as a result of the pandemic.
And to go back to what Hilary said, I think that people are craving connection. Our pivot from in-person to remote was very quick. And I think initially we were just really kind of blown away by the attendance numbers. You expect maybe you're going to kind of start small and build back up, but we had nearly as many people tuning in on Zoom as we had in person, and didn't really miss a beat. So even though it's an imperfect medium, I think people were really craving that connection. We had a lot of people step forward to assume volunteer versions of handling the volunteer roles in terms of handling the technical components, being a techno worker, et cetera. So that all happened, you know, really pretty quickly. And I think that just shows the enthusiasm and the desire to stay connected. Adam, what would you say?
I'd say the most important thing we learned is similar to what you just said. We found that not only were people willing to continue being remote and like really capable of it, we too had lots of people come to our first remote service, and that those numbers stayed pretty much until we hit the summer, and now they're coming back. Well, they started coming back by September, I mean. But it was also that there were lots of people in our community that weren't able to be connected until we were remote, but wouldn't have been able to get to church. We started getting people who we hadn't seen in a long time return, and people who had moved far away come back to us, and it just kind of emphasized, and we'll touch on this in later questions, but remote is an excellent tool for connection, and live stream services and all of our other tools that we've come up with, which we'll touch on later.
Yeah, I think we found that too, that there was a silver lining in that dark cloud in terms of people tuning in that might not physically come in person, people, long-term members who had moved out of state and were tuning back in. So that was all really kind of nice to see.
Did any of the congregations need to actually amend like church bylaws or anything in order to foster supporting remote meetings and, not voting in person on things, just to kind of keep the church operating?
Well, what we did, the annual meeting was approaching pretty quickly. So our president did arrange, and this was with a lot of technical support, a way to do that meeting virtually. Then what we did was had a series of, so normally you'd have the congregational meeting and you'd have a lot of discussion from the floor, a lot of questions and answers. That just wasn't going to be possible on Zoom without it being chaos. So we had the presentation on the normal Sunday. Then we arranged a series of Zoom meetings, small groups that people could tune into, each attended by 3 board members. So they were able to ask their questions, process any concerns. And then we did the voting remotely a week later. We haven't actually changed any bylaws, but we've amended procedures to work within the current bylaws. So we didn't miss any timelines in terms of when to post the budget, when to have the vote.
How about at UCE or?
Yeah, I think we were able to pretty much work within our bylaws. The only sort of hitch was the specificity of people needing to be present, having a quorum present. So it is more of just an interpretation of, well, present means present online as well. I mean, obviously, but so we haven't had to do, we've been able to adapt in terms of annual meeting, and we had a congregational vote to call a settled senior minister, and that was challenging in a number of ways, but we got through it. But I will say, I just want to go back to that the ability to reach some people. I think there's been a both and of that I've been amazed at how we've been able to expand the capacity for many people to be able to connect virtually. That's been delightful for me to see, especially people that are older that may not have, didn't grow up with technology, that have been able to get comfortable with that. Again, we have Adam that has been really helpful in working with people that weren't comfortable to try to get comfortable. I think Lee mentioned in the chat that we are fortunate that most folks, many folks in our congregation have the resources to have that technology available to them. And that's not true in every congregation. And I know that there were congregations in Evanston that were saying, if they needed to purchase iPads or things like that for folks that didn't have access to those things. I think we got to that place that we needed that. But what I've seen on the other side of things is that, children and youth who we know have grown up and lived their lives online have almost had the exact inverse experience of being like, yeah, no, thanks. I'm not engaging this way. Parents are like, no, I'm not engaging this way. Thank you, like gratitude for trying. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for being here, but we just can't. And that to me has been the greatest challenge of this pandemic, is how do we stay connected to our families and our young people in a way that is meaningful and safe and continues to help foster that sense of community, for those that just aren't feeling it online, because, you know, we only know of the ones that are, you know, we only know of the ones that are like, yes, thank you for doing this. This is wonderful. I feel so connected. It's great to be able to tune in from Arizona. But the ones that just aren't. It's like what Shelby was saying, is like, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't see. And it's been really challenging to figure out how to sort of track those people down without feeling like they're being hounded.
I think Hilary wants to interject something, and really the broader question that Eileen just was jumping to was what have been some of the consistent difficulties or challenges that you're facing. So, but Hilary, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat, because I think what Eileen said has been true for us as well, that we've made some discoveries that I think will be helpful in the future to understand, helpful if we're stuck at times being virtual, how to make it more palatable for people who, especially for adolescents and young adults, for whom it's not a challenging medium. It's a medium they're a little sick of. We could have a whole conference on that. But what I think I saw happen was that there were multiple ways of maintaining that sense of contact. And so even for the individuals and families who said, oh no, we can't do this, they still felt connected because of the multiple ways in which we reached out. And I'm positive that that's also true at UCE, and I know it's true at many other congregations, that there were home packets, that there were drive-through events, and various things that actually made us aware that there were, that we could step up our presence in people's homes, sending home materials and activities, and whether or not they used them, they felt more connected because of them. And so when you're in a transitional phase, when you're in a liminal phase, being able to know that that hand is out there and that it will reach you on the other side is vitally important. And whether or not you choose to grasp that hand right away or you're going to wait a little bit, I think that is less important than just knowing that there's a bridge there. And so what I've seen are people who are remaining connected even if they're not present on Sunday morning or present in small groups. They may be present in phone calls and emails.
Great, thank you. That does complement nicely Eileen's points. Is there anything that anyone else on the panel had to add to that?
I'll build on what Eileen talked about a little bit. One of the biggest challenges has been getting people invested in the technology who have trouble doing that. There are a couple reasons. There are people that just don't have it. There are people that don't know how to use it. As the point person in the congregation for helping us, like, I talked to Eileen right away and I was like, what is part of my job and what is not? And she said, if it is help assisting with their congregational life, then that is part of your purview. I was like, great. So if somebody's having trouble with Zoom or anything, like, I'm going to help. But I found that people are part of their own problem sometimes. And I mean that they approach something that's unknown or that they feel they're not proficient at, and they quickly either get angry or they feel like they're imposing on my time or whoever's trying to help them. And I'd sort of like to stress that patience is a big factor for reaching out to those people, because they may say, I'm done for today. I can't, I've grappled with this as much as I can. Can you come back to me later? which is great, or just reiterating to them that like you are not worthless because you don't know how to use Zoom, which is something that I've heard from people. And it's just, there is so much more value to you besides your capability with technology. I'm here to help you. We're all here to help each other through it. And, you know, just don't be like my family who starts yelling at each other over the phone because grandma doesn't know how to turn the camera around. That's not. But yeah. And then I guess the other slightly different challenge, which sort of leads into the next question, is that when we did in-person church and somebody new came to the congregation, we'd have several people at the door greet them and say, hello, hi, welcome to UCE. Can you fill out our visitor clipboard? Which we no longer have, in that it is entirely voluntary, whether they choose to let us know that we're there or not. I think that's fine. I find that there are people that exist that may never visit a public place if they need to reveal themselves, my girlfriend being one of them. But it makes it a little bit more challenging to know how many people we're reaching and who they are. But we're finding that people are choosing to engage anyway, and our stream of new members has not quite dwindled as much as you would expect.
That the question that Adam's begun answering is, how has the pandemic affected the welcoming of visitors and joining of new members, and that anonymity that's associated with joining in on a YouTube live stream of a service is a real easy thing to then never be able to even connect with somebody who participated. And because we had different platforms, Zoom and YouTube live, we have different congregational experiences, I think, to share as well. So is there something that either Hilary or Tom you want to say regarding how the pandemic affected welcoming of visitors?
Well, so because we were doing Zoom, we are taking attendance. We are able to kind of see who's tuning in, who's not, and who might be slipping through the cracks. Hilary, do you want to talk about your new member series? Because that was actually really successful.
Yeah, I guess, and I hope my volume is a little bit better. But there were a couple of things. I felt like we didn't have more shortcomings in this platform than we've had in other platforms, that we kept our shortcomings with us. And at the same time, and I think UCE did this as well, we reached outside of worship and established a calling system so that the members of the congregation were being called at least quarterly, if not like kind of every other month, in clusters. And so we were doing more work checking in. We sent, letters, cards to everybody in the congregation. I think I heard the same thing from Eileen. So we were doing things to keep in touch with people that we already knew. But the other thing that we did was we had an online welcome to CCUU every month, just like we had when we were in person. So one of our volunteers took that upon herself to keep doing that. And then as the year went on, and I realized that our membership team was a little bit of a loss, I used some of the Soul Matters starting point curriculum and led that. And I was amazed at the level of engagement and how much more time people were willing to invest in an orientation and a seeker setting. And that it made it easier for families because their kids could, cavort around in the background and periodically interrupt things, which I have always welcomed because it makes life real. and we had really great attendance. And out of that, I think the majority of them are going to join. There were 11 or 12 participants, and we're still working on, this is a bylaw issue, how you get people to virtually sign a membership book. So now that we're getting toward vaccination, a vaccination tipping point, I think I'll just have them come in person. But I'd like to consider those who have stated their intention to be members. And so I was really pleased at how that turned out, how much time people were willing to put in and how interested they were. And it also raised up for me the issue of how people really do want to. They want to connect, they want to join. And again, the other thing that was interesting, and this goes back to something that came up earlier, is quite a number of them were folks with small children and with families. And so instead of feeling like they were getting more distant, they were more eager to connect. They may not be eager to tune in and see their faces themselves on Sunday mornings, but they're really eager to feel connected with the congregation, with the minister, with the programs. And I was impressed to learn from UCE that they had 17 people who joined over the course of the year, which to me says that people were overjoyed in the process of the sort of desert that was the pandemic to find oases of warmth. And at the same time, one of the things that I learned was when we migrate, I'd like to have somebody who's an online greeter, who welcomes people every Sunday and says, "Hi, are you new?" Whether they're new or not. My name is so-and-so, just like you can admit people in a waiting room. Why not have a greeter on Zoom or whatever your platform is, so that you can figure out how to reach people. So those are my initial thoughts.
Eileen, you want to speak about Evanston's experience?
Yeah, as Hilary said, we've been delighted that so many people have, without even ever being in the building, have been able to find community. And one of the things that we did with that first batch of 10 or 11 people that joined was to form a covenant group for those new members to try to help them stay connected. The other piece that in addition to the cards and calls that we've tried to do periodically, in addition to the pastoral care team trying to stay really in touch with those that are particularly vulnerable, was to form what we've called proximity partners. Again, this was something that Karen worked on while she was our congregational life director, and we've moved it forward with Adam and Susan Francis to form these geographic groups that are meant to be mutual support, care, social connection, based on geography. We started with smaller groups and many more of them, but have found that we've needed to combine some just based on logistics and participation. But many of those groups have gotten together for virtual events, for some in-person outdoor events, and that's been not across the board wildly popular, but has been another avenue of connection that has sprung up out of need that we're excited to carry forward in a multi-platform way, right? When I think one of the going back to the learnings, like one of the first things we realized is that, and I think all congregations realize this, oh, we're going to need to continue, even when we do go back to being in-person space, we're going to need to find a way to continue to do some things virtually, some things both virtually and in person, like our Sunday services. But, you know, can we do board meetings online? Is there any reason why we shouldn't do that? It makes it more possible for people with children at home to participate. Makes people who, you know, have trouble driving at night able to participate and be leaders. And so looking for the right balance of those in-person and virtual events, and what things can be done both. And that takes some equipment, that takes some technological and hardware support and staff support. But it's kind of exciting to be thinking along those lines of what is possible and what's most life-giving.
Well, and along those lines, the next question tries to get into a little bit, trying to figure out if there are some ideas or investments that you made, you know, solutions to problems that have been created within your congregation that are going to maybe address that ongoing, you know, that identification of the opportunity for increasing inclusiveness by offering hybrid models, for example. And I know that there's some innovation work, some investments that have been done in congregations. Is there, I know one that maybe Adam could speak to has to do with music and supporting the whole idea of music and worship. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, so churches are normally covered by a copyright exemption, which means as long as we are using music for the purposes of worship, we can play whatever music we want in our building. But online, that doesn't apply. So a lot of, I mean, we've all had to grapple with how do we deal with copyright. And there's a lot of fear surrounding that topic because, you know, I mean, there's a fear of getting sued. There's a fear of getting your YouTube channel taken down or however you go about it. But the reality is it's a lot less scary. Eileen attended a workshop and her main takeaway was that we shouldn't be afraid of getting sued. It's a lot more about honoring the musicians and artists and making sure that they are compensated. So part of my role, my ongoing role, maybe not each week, is can you find who owns this and can you ask them how we can pay them to use their music? Depending on the platform you use, you might be able to get one license is a popular one. It covers a lot, but not all of our hymns. You may be able to get the CCS license, which is at a conglomeration of ASCAP and BMI and all these other big companies that own all these music. Unfortunately for us, they claim that their coverage doesn't face YouTube, so we have to contact everybody individually. But if you host to your own website, that may help you out a lot. But the main takeaway we've had from that is it's important to just be connected and share resources, because it's annoying enough trying to find out who owns something and how to try to contact them without having anywhere to go on. But when we first started this process, Reverend Karen Mooney shared with me a spreadsheet which was created by someone else, and I don't remember his name, and it's not on the spreadsheet. It has all these hymns and who owns them. The UUA, under the leadership of Erica Hewitt and Susan Lawrence, has created a document which deals specifically with our hymns. So that's where I go first to see, is this public domain or is this covered by one license? If it's not, I head back to that spreadsheet and I go, this is who owns it, let's find them. And otherwise, it's just the ASCAP website. They have a big old repertory and a search thing and go, who owns Brave by Sarah Bareilles? And it'll tell you. And I'm keeping my own spreadsheet of companies and what they've said before. So teamwork.
I would highly recommend, I'll try to find the link and put it in the chat if that's helpful, the webinar that Matthew Johnson from the Rockford Congregation led with Erica Hewitt. And there's a working document that is very, very helpful about all of the hymns in both of our hymnals. You know, that obviously doesn't cover all the vast universe of music that we often pull from, but it's a really helpful start. So I'll try to find the link to that webinar, which I think anybody can view.
Yeah,
Sorry, who was?
I just wanted to go back to what Adam was saying, that I think that networking and collaborating is really important, and it's especially important for congregations with smaller staff and who don't have the same dedicated number of hours for doing the research, because it can take quite a bit of detective work to find out, not about the hymns. As Unitarian Universalists, we have a really wide liturgy, so the music can come from all over the place. And to be able to collaborate and to be able to build more of a team so that smaller congregations with fewer professional staff hours can clue in some way, I think can be really helpful. And I think for us as a congregation, it was important, not because I feared being sued, because I definitely knew from early on we weren't going to get sued if somebody discovered we used one piece of music. If we became, habit forming pirates, could have been an issue. But it was more because so many of the artists that we use are smaller artists too. We, the sort of mid-sized artists that I want to make sure that they're fairly compensated and that they can make a living doing their music. And at the same time, we don't have the resources to necessarily pay them for a year's worth of work, right? We have to, there's got to be a balance. So collaboration, I think, can be really good in that respect too.
So Mike, at Countryside, I think we realized that the pandemic was forcing us into doing things that we probably should have done several years ago. So I suspect that there'll always be a hybrid presence in our worship services and our meetings, etc. We didn't have a position like Adam's position. So what we've done as a board, as a congregation, is to create a part-time position to take some of the pressure off of the volunteers who've, really leapt into the helping position, but, face a little bit of burnout when you're doing that all the time, including over the summer. So we've created a part-time position to try to take some of that pressure off. We do have the capacity to live stream the service from the sanctuary. Once we're back in the building, we've got the ability to have some people in person in the sanctuary and beam it to the social hall, which is just a few feet away. So I suspect that, we're always going to have some sort of a hybrid presence in everything. And I've definitely heard board members say that they don't mind doing the board meetings on Zoom. To go back, I feel like this morning I'm always answering the previous question, but to go back to that demographic divide that we were talking about, where the older people continued to participate with Zoom and younger adults and families maybe not so much. I think that that's something that we should note, but not really dwell on. And perhaps this goes without saying, but as older people, even those of us who've always been healthy and never worried about getting sick, as older people, we were just kind of constantly bombarded with, the fear you're going to get this and you're going to die. And older people did moderate their social habits much more than people 20 to 50 did. And with younger families, I think we've got to realize after a whole week, 6-7 hours a day of trying to be their kids' online teacher and deal with remote, tuning into Sunday religious exploration may not be what they're up for. So even though we might have had less participation in some other demographic groups, I don't think that means that there's a lack of interest, and hopefully those people will come back. So it's just up to us to make sure that we've got the different models available to people so they can participate at whatever medium they're comfortable with.
Given that we eventually are going to have some sort of a return to church, to having that in person, that's kind of what we're starting to talk about now here. And I want to navigate in the next, we're going to go over a little bit here on the panel time before we jump to the open Q&A, so that we can get a little bit of feedback regarding the future of church. What does the future look like? And I want to start actually with Shelby with a question on how dynamic you expect these federal, state, and local policies to be that might affect, what the practices will be at church when we do return.
Yeah, so like any epidemiologist who gets asked to predict the future, I'm going to waver a little bit. But I do think that the good thing is that what we do know now is what is safe. Like, we do know now the good practices, those aren't going to change. It's going to be about masking. It's going to be about improving ventilation to the degree you can. It's going to be about, getting vaccinated is always going to be the biggest thing. Staying distanced for a while yet, probably, and in groups of people where you don't know if they're vaccinated. So those things aren't going to change. They're going to be consistent for quite a while. What we don't know necessarily is, how quickly numbers are going to go down. If, God forbid, something would happen and they could go up. There's been really good news in the last couple of months about our vaccines and how they deal with variants, but every prediction we've ever made in this pandemic has been wrong. So I'm never going to say that they couldn't change. So I think it is really about that, knowing these core practices that we're always going to be returning to, and I think knowing that we can make these decisions now and then still change them in the future. There is always, if we start small and then things keep going well, we can always be incremental, and there is always going to be more information coming from the state and from the different levels that you're going to have to reincorporate. But hopefully the frequency of those updates will decrease as we do hit a little bit more stability with vaccines.
That would be nice, that the news isn't every day COVID. So before going to the rest of the panelists with a question kind of about the future, I want to just sort of set the stage with the reminder that, not everybody's going to probably get a vaccine, that can get a vaccine. There'll be some people that will choose not to. There will be people who can't make it back to church because of one reason or another, whether it's because they have driving issues, or they don't have access to a card, or they have a disability. We have people who are uncomfortable and unable to, or embarrassed about asking for help to be able to navigate the technology, to be able to join, that aspect of church life, this online aspect. So given all that, what does it mean to be inclusive, and how do we fulfill our second principle of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, given this new world? And I'll turn that to that sounds like a ministerial question.
I'll just say, I think that we have to start with the understanding that we have never been 100% accessible to all people.
Right, right.
There have been countless people that have been unable to access our community for a variety of reasons that we haven't been aware of. And so this is a practice of continually trying to expand access to try to be ever more inclusive, which is always going to be a challenge. And so if we can provide as comparable as possible, again, it's never going to be exactly the same to be both viewing the service at home and live in the sanctuary, but we can work towards making those comparable. And, for example, one way that we might consider coming back, one phase of coming back may be streaming the service to the sanctuary and having some, smaller number of people viewing the service in the sanctuary, just as those at home would be. So you'd have a similar experience, but there'd be some level of proximity and being together in person for those that want that, and others still viewing at home who would be more comfortable doing that. It's just one of the examples.
Let me ask then, Hilary, thinking about the same question, but not related to the service, related to the community, church community, how we run church. What does it mean to be inclusive?
Well, I do need to echo what Eileen said initially, which is that we haven't ever been truly inclusive. In person, we often alienate people the moment they walk in the door, or even the moment they pull in the parking lot. So we have to be more and more conscious of what inclusivity means, and some of this I think will be making sure that there are multiple levels. One of the first levels is making sure that you make resources available. So I can easily see that there are funding issues that could be up ahead. Who's got the technology and who doesn't have the technology, and to what extent can we afford to finance people having equipment at home. So that's one thing. Another thing is to make sure that we make ourselves more public, and perhaps YouTube isn't our only option. There may be other options. I do want to say that one of the things that amazes me at times is that we have had religious movements that have been on television since forever, and have not had a problem. They may not have given the kind of intimate sense of community that we would want to have, and that we insist on because we believe that the holy happens between people. But that, we need to look at how we broadcast, and that we see that there are ways of broadcasting on multiple platforms in ways that can be successful. So I think some of it will be financial, some of it will be, joining the 20th century, much less the 21st, in terms of broadcasting services. And then some of it will have to do with recognizing that there may be ways in which we share resources with congregations that may be smaller, and that there may be learning opportunities, there may be classes, there study groups, all sorts of things that don't have to be just one congregation, but could be multiple congregations, and that there can be there's some really great technology that I've been learning about where you know the old iPad on a swivel that can go around the room like it was a real person. There's actually technology that does that better than that sort of cartoon image, that can sit in a room and swivel around to include all of the people who are there in the room, and people can be at home. And so what I'd really like to see is that we share resources, whether it's music or learning or membership. Another thing that I think has been an interesting positive and negative is that we've always been a congregational movement, but perhaps this is inviting us to be larger than just our congregations. Perhaps it is inviting us to be both regional and even national, so that the room I'm sitting in right now is a room in West Virginia because I'm out of town. But it's a room in West Virginia who belongs to a family member who attends our services. And I know now of people who attend multiple services on Sundays. And that's, so are we being even more inclusive than we know about? Are there more people who are part of what we do? And I think financially we need to make a commitment to make sure that when people come to our websites or when they walk to the front door, that they see a sign saying, if you don't have the equipment to do this, you know, here's information for your local library. We'll help you get a library card, or we'll have a used iPad, or we've got it, whatever it is. We need to make sure that people can join us and know that they're able to join us. But I also saw, Mike, I saw your enthusiasm about the idea of congregations banding together, and I would like to see us do a whole lot more sharing of resources and learning experiences.
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
Lee, you asked if sound systems could be adjusted to compensate for singers in masks. I don't quite know what you have in mind, but I guess yes. We are looking at actually miking the choir, which we don't usually do. We'll have to do that for a live stream anyway. Otherwise, when we get to the singing part, there just won't really be anything.
Okay, I'm going to try to share a slide again. I think because of time, we need to open up to the wider audience here to be able to address questions to the panel. And I would suggest, so that it's not too chaotic, that that questions be posted into the chat for anybody that has a question that they would like to ask. Or raise your hand. Try to have a gallery view here so I can see who all's on.
While we're waiting for questions to be added to the chat, if as a panelist, can I take the opportunity to ask my own question? Because Shelby brought up the idea of air filtration, and this is something on our COVID task force we've talked about, that it seems like there's this general idea that air filtration is a really important, airflow is super key. But as we've tried to get some answers about how best to do that in our building with our, complex furnace system for our very high ceiling sanctuary, it seems like those that you'd think would be experts don't have any real concrete answers about how to do that, or how important that is, or what's the best way to do that in terms of mitigating COVID. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so it's certainly something I'm also not an expert on. I can put in the chat the CDC. I don't know if you've already seen this, but the CDC does have a whole page on ventilation that they have put up as that's become more and more relevant, and it does have for a fairly wide range of solutions that range from, we don't have much to invest in this, but we can put a fan in the window, and this is how to put the fan in the window so it makes it more safe and not less safe. But the problem and one of the reasons you don't get a lot of answers is ventilation is so building specific. And so to some degree, at a point, you just do need a building engineer who knows your building, and especially with larger and more complex buildings. But sometimes I think the ventilation question can be less about, that might be a longer term thing of, the next time we're doing building work versus, maybe it's just about how many windows we can open for this year. And maybe it's about how much can we do outside, because the best ventilation you could get is just, getting your youth group together outside instead of in a building. So that's always going to be kind of the quickest and most successful solution there.
Can I ask Shelby a quick question, knowing that on this same issue?
Sure.
I know that there are machines that filter the air. Are there better or worse machines that filter the air, or is that just, you're saying better to open the windows?
Yes, there are better and worse machines. And I know this is once again not totally my area. I know that one thing you do have to be careful about is you'll see things that say stuff like HEPA-like filter, or not actually a HEPA filter, but trying to pretend it is. So you want to be very careful about things like that. But what I know less about is what the real best options are there. Although you might, once again, I think there are some resources that you can find online about best filters there. And I don't know if that's specifically addressed on the CDC link that I sent, but it might be.
I wanted to respond to one of the questions.
Well, why don't we, let's go down the list. So
yeah.
There was first off a question directed to Adam, which was about how much time you invest with seeking copyright commissions.
Oh, hello, Mary Sheldon. Second of all, it varies. It depends what I'm asked to find and how hidden the information is. If it's Brave by Celebrarilis, it'll be very easy to find, but difficult to actually get in touch with the people. Or if it's a while ago, I was asked to look into This Joy, which ended up being by an old gospel singer, and like the record company that originally owned it is out of business, and the people who bought them are out of business, and so who owns it now? I'd say in terms of percentage of my time I spend, this isn't a percentage, but it'd be maybe like 1 to 2 hours a week in totality. There's a lot of, pulling my hair about it and like agonizing about thinking about doing it. But in terms of actual time that it takes, it's not that it takes a long time, but it's a lot of time per reward, sort of. In that it's just like finding who to send, and then I send an email, and then I just wait. But I would say if you're just getting into doing it, definitely like make a spreadsheet or a list, or like keep track of who you already talked to and what you're actually waiting for. Because I didn't originally, and it took much more time just to figure out who I'd already contacted. So
Adam, could we create a shared space that people from multiple congregations could share that same information?
Yes, I was thinking about that as this went on, Mike. So those gears are turning. I don't know how I will get in touch with the right people, but I need to think about how that will be structured. Like, are we just going to put down companies? Are we going to put down songs? Both would probably be useful.
Another conversation.
Yeah.
Let's go to another question. So the next question that was on there is not really directed to the panel, so we'll come back to that later. But Shirley Adams had asked a question having to do with services and the idea of is there energy and interest among the ministers and congregants to share services?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've demonstrated that a couple times through the UUANI spring revival and the democracy revival, which I'm sure Karen is just like going like this because it was a tremendous amount of work on her part, especially to coordinate that. But that being said, there's also been, last summer we did a preaching collaborative where 9 ministers submitted their sermons and readings, and then each congregation used those. So we had our summer covered and could take the necessary break. So each, was the cost of one sermon, and you received, 8 other sermons, which was terrific. They're doing that again this sermon. Yeah, they're doing that again this year. I had a different arrangement going on, but yeah, it's a really wonderful way to do it. You have things to add about that, Hilary?
Yeah, no, I think that we have energy and interest, and I think that it would be good to look. I mean, summers seem like a good time for doing things like that, particularly, but I don't see why. I think ministers would have an interest in sharing worship. It's congregations that I have concerns about. For one thing, our larger congregations, we're mid-sized. I know that Evanston is larger than we are, and has some more resources than we have. But I worry about smaller congregations losing their sense of congregational identity. Now, some of that may be good. There are large megachurches that have many satellites, and maybe we want to have more congregational partnership, so that you have certain things that you do as a congregation in your own area, and learning that you do, and potlucks that you do, or whether we ever have potlucks again, I don't know. That's a whole different question, but I think the sharing of worship is something that as soon as we deal with the licensing and permissions question will be a whole lot easier. And I think the ministers are certainly willing to stream the services into other locations. I'm going to be participating in the worship collaborative this summer. Although our congregation has a really strong interest in maintaining some of their lay-led services. But I think that this is probably one of the most exciting. It's scary and exciting, the idea that although we have always been congregationally oriented, and that each person has a membership in one congregation, that we might in fact become larger in terms of our awareness and participation in multiple congregations, or multiple congregations joining into a collaborative. So you might have a congregation and a regional collaborative.
You mean identifying as a Unitarian Universalist?
Yeah, I mean identifying as Unitarian Universalist as opposed to just Unitarian Universalist in like one congregation. Yeah. That is such a radical way to put it. Thanks, Reverend Eileen.
There's a couple questions that were posed that had to do with vaccinations. They're both a little bit related. One of which relates to, asking people, visitors, about vaccination status and another one about about what rights we have to know or not know somebody's status, and limit their participation potentially based on what that status is.
Yeah.
I'd like to. Oh, go ahead, Hilary.
No, you go ahead. No, you.
You do it. Okay. I'd like to just take a stab at this, because this is a really tricky and thorny question that we are grappling with, and where we're, as Shelby said, things are changing rapidly, and we could have different information at a different point, but where we're landing at this moment with our decision-making process is that we cannot ask people, nor should we ask people ethically, what their vaccination status is in order to participate in public worship experience, right? There's just all kinds of reasons why that's just not who we are. That's not how we should be. However, there is a level of being able to ask or establish the expectation that people with access to certain activities within the congregation or certain positions within the congregation should be expected to be vaccinated. So for example, to expect staff who are using the building, who are working with children, who are people who are singing in the choir, if the choir is going to resume, that should be an opt-in, to have access to that opportunity, which is a high-risk opportunity. To be able to say, you need to be vaccinated. You need to tell us that you're vaccinated. We're not going to, check your card or anything like that, but to, based on the honor system, to say, because this is a high-risk activity for the safety and well-being of everyone, if you are going to sing in the choir, you need to be vaccinated. This is where we're landing at this moment. But to get to a place where the other thing that we're considering is if the Evanston and the surrounding areas are at a certain percentage of vaccination rate in our area, we can assume that our congregation will follow that same sort of trend or more, right? If 70% of people above 16 are vaccinated in Evanston, we can assume that those in our congregation are probably going to be at a similar rate, and that's herd immunity enough to be able to manage the visitors that may or may not be vaccinated. And still require masks, right? Again, added protection. We're mitigating risk, not eliminating it.
Yeah, I'm with you on the we can't ask people, except I would like to ask anybody in the choir since they put lives at risk. But I also feel like not only I think we can require masks. And I think the future is a pretty masky future. So I think we kind of have to orient ourselves toward the future. There are more visionary, exciting ways to do that, but this is one of the less exciting ways. I think that people will be wearing and need to be wearing masks for a very long time. And so I wish I had it with me, but I have one that has chalices on it. And I know there are places that make those. I would rather have masks at the door that were really compliant masks that we give people and say, we're not asking for your vaccination status. We're asking you to wear this secure mask. However, our religious educator pointed out to me that there was a new wristband that's available called Vaccine, SEEN. And that so people can elect to let people know that they've been vaccinated. Again, they're only saying that they've been vaccinated, and who knows for sure. And that, yes, that's right. Dr. Sheldon, the proceeds go to the World Health Organization. And so I think it's a great idea to have people also setting the example of saying, I've been vaccinated and I'm comfortable with the vaccination and I've lived through it, in order to reassure people who feel truly at risk from the vaccination. But I would like to see us really encouraging masking, even for singers. I know masks are no fun. I hate masks. Everybody hates masks. Nobody wants masks. But they're really so much more secure than just hoping that people are vaccinated. And I hope that that's the direction that we all move in.
Okay, given the time here, we're going to have one last question that we're going to pose, and then we're going to cut away to a break, give everybody a bio break here for 5 minutes. And I'm going to kind of combine a couple of questions that have been posed in the chat that basically have to do with gathering again together, either in small groups or otherwise. What's the sort of timeline that congregations have for when it is that there's, what are the stages? Is there some staging that's being thought, or is it going to be, it's binary, nothing, and then we're going to have, it's wide open? What are the thoughts of our panelists?
Well, so we've tried to look at resumption of in-building activities less as an on-off switch, like you said, and more as a dial, okay? Right now, all of our dials are turned to the off position with basically everything happening virtual. So we need to start twisting that dial. We have had some in-person youth gatherings outside, which were quite successful. We've also given the green light to, over the summer, looking at smaller group meetings in the building. There are other opportunities that I think we could take. For instance, there's another spiritual community that rents our building on Saturday afternoons that they have a much smaller number of people. Even if everybody in their group came, it's much smaller than we would have on a Sunday. So looking at them coming back in the summer, that's another way you can kind of twist your dial and see if you know what you think you know. I mean, going back to what Shelby was saying at the beginning, I very strongly feel that we still don't know what we don't know. And there's going to be a lot of unfolding of things as we continue to, when you're under attack like we were, you got to duck and cover, and then when you think that the attack has subsided, only then can you get up and look around and start to survey the damage. So just like we're seeing all of a sudden, like the cost of wood is nine times what it was 2 months ago because of interruptions in the supply chain. And, there's all these things that are going to be these ripple effects that will start to come to light. The cost of food, meat is just, skyrocketing. So I think, there's going to be a lot of those things. I didn't know until we started dealing with one of our renters that wants to come back. It's a large choral group. There are singers' masks. And these people who are very conservative and very safe, and one of them's a public health official and has done research, feel perfectly comfortable coming in the building and singing with each other, knowing their vaccination status in combination with the mask. Well, I didn't know that. So I think that's going to be kind of the biggest problem, is we're sitting here in May trying to make the best decision for where we're going to be in September. With all the trends going on right now, I think we're anticipating that we will have in-building presence in September, but how exactly that's going to look remains to be seen.
Eileen, any comments related to Evanston's plans on that? Are they similar, different?
Yeah, I've been saying for a while that my hope and expectation is that we will be able to come back in some form in person in the building on Sunday morning in September. Leading up to that, we're doing several events and activities outside throughout the summer, small group gatherings. We're actually doing a parking lot pop-up sale in place of our rummage sale, which we weren't able to do last year or this year, but we're doing outside rummage sale essentially, and that will be our first big event. So that's how we're phasing in, but also, you know, again, in September on Sunday morning, it's not like we're going to be, okay, let's, you know, wing the doors wide open. We're considering, what does that look like? Do we register 50 people? We're just about to release our updated guidelines, going from in-person gatherings in the building from a limit of 10 to a limit of 60 is what and that feels like a pretty big jump, but we're trying to look at what is the guidance from the CDC and the Department of Health in Illinois to those are acceptable limits at this point. And so who knows what it'll be in September, but
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you to all the panelists and all the participants for your questions as well. This has been a good, very rich conversation. I'd like to suggest that we take a 5-minute break. Obviously, everybody that doesn't need a break can hang out here and we can chat. But when we come back, we will break out into the affinity groups for some discussion. So this is the group of affinity groups, and we're going to have just one meeting. So the idea is that you'll pick whichever affinity group you would like to join, whichever you'd like to participate in, and they're named as they are because the topics that would typically be talked about in those affinity groups relate to whatever the name of the affinity group is. So as obvious as that may be. What the assignment that it asks for people to do that go into the affinity group is, first off, to after everybody gets settled in, please identify somebody who can take notes for your group, so that when we rejoin up after having the affinity group time, we can have some of the findings shared with everybody who wasn't able to be in your particular meeting, so we all get to learn. Also, I'd suggest, because a lot of the time we hear people really appreciate getting to know and talking with people from other congregations, you should certainly introduce yourself, your congregation, maybe what your role is in the congregation, if you have a role, either as a leader of some sort or you're just interested in this particular area. And if there's a topic or a question that you hope that the group might discuss, not to engage the discussion then, but just as part of your introduction, mention something that might be important to you. And then I'll copy and post these questions into the chat, but basically looking to ask you to answer, what did you learn today that you or your congregation needs to apply? If there's something new, you don't have to spend time talking about the obvious, but if there's something that you learn that you think, wow, we didn't think about that or haven't thought about that, we should participate in this. That's the kind of thing we're getting at. The second question on, were there any particular solutions, any ideas or innovations that your congregation developed that you think other congregations would be interested in, so that we can take this opportunity to share about those. So please let us know if there's something that can and should be shared across congregations. And that's really also related to the third question that starts off, let's not reinvent the wheel. What opportunities do you see for collaboration or joint investment with other congregations or other members of this affinity group? And the idea is, again, we're all UUs. we're not just Unitarian Church of Evanston or Hinsdale or Palatine. We are all UUs. What can we do together that can help us all do better as a faith? So that's the basic assignment, and I invite people to select the room that you would like to be going to, and hopefully people have done this before, but if you're not familiar, there should be on your screen. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Should be on your screen a block of 4 buttons that says breakout rooms. And if you select that, the names of the rooms are there, and you can choose where you'd like to go. And we'll be meeting then as a breakout group for, I've got to go back here to find my time, until about 11:45. That'll give us 15 minutes to report back. All right.
Mike is on here twice.
Yeah, sorry, here, I'll make that go away. Okay, how's everybody doing? Good, all right, great. So let's take just the 10-15 minutes that we have here to have report backs from the affinity groups, any sort of summaries on the questions. Maybe we could start with the board and leadership development group. Who is capturing notes for that?
Well, I took notes there. We talked about, kind of revisited the whole thing about sharing, I think, some kind of resource for sharing reopening plans, the copyright spreadsheet, technical equipment and costs, and I think some of the webinar links that have been mentioned at various points. There was discussion of a Monroe family grant that could be used for equipment for broadcasting stuff from churches. I can email you this, Mike.
That'd be great. Please do.
And apparently the Mid-America region people have also offered help with grant writing. And then we had a lot of discussion around kind of what reopening looked like. There was a mention that some of the Catholic churches are actually using reservations to manage how many people are in the sanctuary. There was discussion around like congregations being anxious to get back together again and the need to communicate more with them, and how do we include them in forming our plans. And some discussion about starting with small groups, maybe outside, and then moving more inside, and how comfortable our members going to be. Like some of us are more risk averse than others. And then there was somebody pointed out that there's a Duluth congregation reopening plan that is quite extensive. You can find it on the UUA website. And in that same vein about other sources of information, there's a site called covidactnow.org that is good for current status of infection by locality. And the IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health site, is also good for info and restriction plans, that kind of stuff. I think that covered everything we talked about.
Excellent, thank you. Who was doing notes for membership and welcoming?
I did take some notes, Marie, but if you have other things to chime in on, certainly do. It was a good discussion, too short, of course, but one of the things Marie said that I share too is that in terms of membership initiatives, it seems to be the same people doing the stuff, or there is no membership committee. That was echoed more than one other time. We're fortunate that we have a membership committee, but it does need some energizing. Don talked about having a task force that has devoted some time and attention, but I think he's also mentioned that it tends to be the same folks who've been members for a while. We need to try to get ways to mobilize new members. Bev was talking about a theme that we always discuss at Hinsdale is how do we maintain our membership. And I think it was Dan and Peter also echoed this, that how do we maintain and grow our membership? And I shared our experience, which I think is a little different than some of the other participants. We've added more new members through this pandemic than we had added in the 2 years prior, which is pretty much a surprise to us, I think. And I really like what Dan Felt was talking about. He's the main greeter at Park Forest. And he shared sort of an anecdotal thing about a study that said the church must make 6 meaningful contacts with new people within 6 months or they don't stick around. So I'll be looking to try to find that study and share that with our membership team. And Linda Peterson, I've forgotten where you're from, Linda, Beverly, shared that they now have a liaison to the board that's between the membership, your liaison between membership and what was the other committee, Linda?
You're
maybe
muted.
we lost Linda. Linda might be
She's
muted.
muted. No, she's just muted.
Okay.
Religious education.
Okay, and RE. All right. So I thought that might be another way to better make connections between membership initiatives and leadership. Peter was sharing, and Peter's from Trio